everyone, and welcome to this session of Capacity LATAM. I would like to thank our diamond sponsor Telefonica and our gold sponsors, Gold Connect and Telxius, as well as the rest of our supporters for making this event possible. I'm excited now to be introducing this session that we've got in partnership with NTT, assessing network security and the impact of DDoS attacks. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to your moderator for this session, Vishwanathan. Apologies for the pronunciation, and take it away.
Thank you, Georgia, for the introduction. My name is Vishwanathan. I'm with NTT, and I manage their global sales organization for the global IP network based in Redmond, Washington. I have the privilege and the opportunity to be here with some of our esteemed panelists, some customers of ours. Some of the panelists are with NTT, others are outside of NTT. We are looking forward to an engaging discussion on the topic of assessing network security and the impact of DDoS attacks, especially in light of the environment that we've been operating in over the last 14 or so months. So without further ado, let me just introduce our panelists to you and then let them introduce themselves as well a bit deeper. So we've got with us Darren Grabowski. Darren is a manager within our network security team at NTT and does a fantastic job of operating and managing that group for us. As well with us is Ligio Gomez, who's a sales engineer with us in Brazil and supports our Brazil sales team and is a resident expert on the region for us. So appreciate both of them being on. Emerson Eleuterio is a CEO of Novell, who is a customer of NTT, and we really appreciate him taking the time to join us and be part of the panel. Tom Paseka is with Cloudflare, also a customer of NTT. Again, we appreciate him joining us. And then last but not least, Flavio Souza, who is a operations director with QNet. We also appreciate his participation and joining us on this panel. So let me just have them introduce themselves real quick a little bit further, and then we'll get into their questions.
Yeah, thanks, Vish. So my name is Darren Grabowski. I am the manager of the network security team for NTT. I'm based in the Dallas, Texas area. And I have team members here in Dallas with me as well as in Malaysia. And we're responsible for network security across 2914, AS2914, not only for our customers with our DDoS protection service, but also for NTT network security in general.
Thanks, Darren. Ligio?
Okay, my name is Ligio. I work for NTT since 2017. I support the sales guys here for Latin America and Brazil, giving them some technical and commercial support expertise.
Thank you, Ligio. Emerson, over to you.
Emerson, você pode se apresentar?
Olá, pessoal. Eu sou o Emerson, sou um dos representantes da Novell Telecomunicações aqui de São Paulo, Brasil. Sou um dos clientes da NTT também, administramos um ISP na parte de segurança e engenharia de backbone, e é isso.
Okay, he's Emerson. He's responsible for the operation of Novell. He's one of our customers here in Brazil, and Emerson also is responsible for the operation of the company.
Thank you, Emerson and Ligio. Tom?
Hey, I'm Tom Paseka. I'm head of interconnection strategy at Cloudflare. I've been with Cloudflare for a very long time and have really grown up fighting DDoS attacks here over the past 9 years. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Tom. Last but not least, Flavio?
Olá, boa tarde. Meu nome é Flávio Souza, sou responsável pela infraestrutura de backbone da QNet Telecom. Somos de Umuarama, estado do Paraná, no Brasil, e também somos clientes NTT.
Okay, he's Flávio Souza. He's responsible for QNet provider here in south of Brazil, in Paraná State, and he is also QNet also is a NTT customer here in Brazil.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Flavio. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you, Ligio, for translating that. So without further ado, then, let's get into the discussion itself. I've got 5 or 6 questions, depending on how we pace through the panel discussion, that I want to ask each of you. I will ask the question, then I will give each of you 2 minutes to sort of respond and provide your perspective. We will start with Tom. The first question will be given to Tom, and then we will go to Emerson. Third, we'll go to Darren, and then finally we will go to Flavio, with Ligio interjecting as needed from a translation perspective, as well as adding his input where he feels it's relevant. We may switch up the order just a bit as we go through it, but again, about 2 minutes for each of you to answer each of these questions, and for us to debate around it. So with that, the first question I have for you, Tom, is obviously we've all been operating in an environment that's been unprecedented for us over the last number of months. So how has the nature and frequency of DDoS attacks, in your opinion, given your sort of prior experience as well and what you've experienced recently, how has that changed over these last 12 to 14 months?
Sure, we've certainly seen an increase in the number of attacks of different types as well. So in Q4 of 2019, Cloudflare was blocking around 50 billion cyber threats a day. That increased to about 57 billion in Q4 of 2020. So the amount of activity we've been seeing on the network, malicious activity on the network, has really increased over the past sort of 12 to 18 months. Similarly, we're seeing an increased rate in DDoS attacks of all kinds, not just cyber attacks. And these are really at scales where it could impact the network and access. In this environment where we're all working from home and internet is so critical to keeping everyone online, the attacks are really an issue for us. I mean, for the internet in general.
And just to follow up on that question, and so you gave us a comparison of how that's increased over time. Do you think this has increased primarily because the remote environment we're in, or is there some other sort of attribute that's causing the increase in DDoS attacks?
I certainly think that we're all a lot more vulnerable to it in the remote environment that we are, depending on the internet for all of our access. And one of the things we're seeing is that with more people in front of their computers, there's going to be more cyber attacks. Previously, with people attending school, one example is that they're disconnected from their computers. And I hate to say it, but a lot of teenagers like launching DDoS attacks against other, say, people in their games. But when they're at home, they're able to do that more frequently, and that drives up a lot of the DDoS traffic.
Indeed. We've certainly seen our share of it as a network provider as well. And so I think Darren can give us some more perspective on that as we go through the round of questions. Thank you, Tom. I may come back to you with a follow-up question on that. Emerson, I would pose the same question to you. How has the volume and the frequency and the nature of attacks changed over time, over these last 14 months or so, from your perspective? It's a question for
Emerson. Ele pergunta como vocês acreditam que os últimos 12 meses, né, houve mudança nos ataques DDoS, e o que vocês pensam aí em termos de segurança de rede, o que precisa considerar aí para o futuro?
Ligio, olha só, então, ó, na verdade, acho que todo o backbone, principalmente aqui no Brasil, ainda é muito carente, né? Nós, por sermos provedores de pequeno acesso, vamos dizer assim, então tem muito recurso que ainda está muito longe do nosso alcance. Mas são recursos que a comunidade tem implementado aí de boas políticas de roteamento, como RPKI, como IRR, né, com cadastros ali no RADB, né, e algumas soluções free. Então, isso já ajuda o backbone das companhias, principalmente dos ISPs, a melhorar um pouco o seu backbone. Né? Eu vejo muitos ISPs indo no alinhamento de colocar uma solução de firewall, né? Mas acho que a grande chave está aí entre uma solução de anti-DDoS, que aí fornecido pelas grandes operadoras, que ainda não está muito acessível para os ISPs. Para você ter uma ideia, isso acaba dobrando, às vezes, de valor do link, ou fica até inviável, né? E, então, eu diria que são essas soluções que os ISPs têm adotado para poder melhorar o seu backbone de uma forma que não exija custo inicial, mas o ponto-chave seria realmente esse, ter uma solução de anti-DDoS que algumas operadoras oferecem, e um ponto crucial é ter boas CPEs, bons dispositivos nas casas dos assinantes, porque hoje são equipamentos básicos, que não protegem ali aqueles IPTV, aqueles aparelhinhos que fatalmente fazem ataques de dentro da rede para fora, né? Então, o que a gente percebe muito é que os ataques são mais voltados de dentro da rede do ISP para outros lugares, e não o contrário no nosso cenário aqui dos pequenos ISPs, assim, como posso dizer.
E vocês tiveram muitos ataques ainda nos últimos 12 ou 14 meses?
Sim, teve uma onda grande aqui no Brasil. Eu não vou dizer se talvez foi nesse período, mas pelo menos nesse último ano aí, eu tive alguns clientes de trânsito, eu tenho alguns clientes de trânsito abaixo da gente, e a gente tem uma operação, tem um cliente que tem 20 GB de banda conosco, e ele ficou 24 horas aí, mais ou menos, fora, porque ele estava sendo bombardeado, e a gente eu não podia oferecer uma solução para ele, porque ao que chegou o meu conhecimento a nível de operadora, é que a operadora consegue proteger o meu ASN, mas não consegue proteger o ASN do meu cliente. Então, eu teria que ter uma solução aqui de anti-DDoS, ou de firewall, de prevenção, de detecção interna aqui, porque a da operadora não era suficiente para mim. Mas teve aí uns 3 ou 4 casos de provedores que ficaram aí umas 24 horas de interrupção.
Okay, so it's a lot of things to translate, but making a wrap-up, Emerson told...
Summarize that for us, Legio, that'd be great.
Yeah, Emerson told that he has 1 or 2 customers in the last 12 months that faced an attack. They suffered almost 24 hours of attack, and it was caused a big impact on the network. But they think that the response for that is to implement best practice for security, and nothing. It's not common. It's not possible. It's not possible for all the autonomous system to do that. Due to the cost and due to the lack of the services provided by the upstream providers.
Okay. In his response, Legio, did Emerson allude to anything about how the frequency of attacks has changed, let's say from a year ago to what it has been over the last several months?
Yeah, he told he has a perception of the period of pandemic about an increase of the attack. It was about 1 or 2 customers that suffered a long duration attack here in Brazil.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So not only frequency increased, but the
duration, the
length of the attacks as well increased over time.
The duration, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Emerson. So Darren, coming over to you from an NTT perspective, how would you answer that question in terms of how things have changed over these last 12 to 14 months relative to the periods before?
Like Cloudflare, we've seen an increase in attacks over the past, if I look back from March when lockdown originally started with COVID and coming into the current time frame, we've definitely seen ebbs and flows as attacks come. And it goes along with students either being actively in school or out of school. And so those trends are a lot what we would see outside of COVID, but the number of attacks have increased during those times. So the sophistication from our perspective at the network level has not been as much as like, Cloudflare is seeing where they can get more granular with that data. Increased attacks, yes. And the duration has also been very interesting because I would say in our stats, it's 67% of the attacks that we see are 5 minutes or less for attacks. So it's not only an issue of the number of attacks, but the duration of each of those attacks being very small. So I think that's been very challenging for a lot of people to defend against those attacks without, sophisticated tools, automation in place and things like that. And certainly everybody being at home has been has affected this because a lot of homes aren't as well connected as they might be at a school. And so it's much easier for somebody to disrupt a stream or a gaming session or whatever it might be, with a smaller attack with short durations. So it's kind of where we've seen things.
Yeah, and to your point, multiplying that over factors of how many people are remotely working, that just creates a compounded problem, doesn't it? Absolutely it does. I think, with the connected world that we're in, we can have doctor's appointments over, a Zoom call and things like that. And so it's definitely been, I think, even more important for network security operators to look at their network to maintain network health, not only in an operational stance, but from a security stance as well. Yeah, appreciate it, Darren. I'm going to come back to you with a follow-up question, and then I want to sort of ask that same question of everybody else if I can, or at least a couple of you. Thank you. So Flavio, going to you finally for the same question. What is your perspective on how this period and the attack and nature or the frequency and nature of attacks has changed from the period before the pandemic?
Ok, Flávio, a pergunta dele é como você percebe a mudança na frequência dos ataques nos últimos 12 meses em comparação ao período anterior?
A percepção que tivemos, né, com relação à mudança de comportamento nos últimos 12 meses se deve ao volume de home offices, né, que a gente teve aí, um volume bastante grande de pessoas em home office. Isso aí possibilitou que muita gente, até mesmo por conta da desatenção, por conta desse período todo que a gente está vivendo, se tornasse cada vez mais, como se diz, menos consciente. Então, ficou muito mais fácil acabar enviando um link para que a pessoa possa clicar, e isso acabou sendo porta de entrada para um volume bastante grande de coleta de informação, né? E, no final, isso acaba se tornando bastante volumoso os ataques. Então, essa é a percepção que o pequeno aí acabou tendo, né? Muito mais gente em casa, muito mais gente usando, muito mais usuário final despreparado. Então, com isso a gente acaba tendo uma brecha maior, vamos dizer assim.
Okay. He told that due to the high volume of home workers during the pandemic, they saw a high volume of attacks in the backbone, and he seems that the reason of that is the lack of the care, is the lack of the worry, the concern about the security protection, making those new home workers opening doors for the attacks, and due to the lack of preparation, due to the lack of expertise from their side.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, right? So it's like an insurance policy. You don't tend to think you need one until you actually experience something, and all of a sudden there's a demand or a need for an insurance policy. And much like all of us have experienced, there's this common thread of because of the number of people that are working remotely or e-commerce remotely or gaming remotely and streaming such and so on and so forth, it's obviously increased the addressable space for attackers, right? And that's certainly seen an impact commonly through all of your answers. It's interesting. So appreciate that. Thank you, Flavio. Darren, coming back to you for a moment, just as a follow-up, and then I want to ask Tom the same question. What has NTT done to sort of prepare ourselves? Obviously, none of us foresaw this coming, right? Last February, March, when we were all thinking we're going about our business as usual. What have we done differently, or NTT broadly has done differently to sort of prepare ourselves going forward from that time in February, March till today, suppose? What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I think just smart network design, first of all, having a robust network that has the capacity and the capabilities to withstand these attacks, to reroute traffic is necessary, not just from a security perspective, but from just a regular outage. So we've done a really good job at just building out the network in that way. From the security side, it's just being more diligent, watching out for these issues and making use of technologies to also help alleviate a lot of these issues. We recently rolled out what we call the low effort queue, where we can put certain types of traffic into this queue that will basically puts it at the bottom of the pile. So in a sustained DDoS situation, especially to certain regions that may not be well connected to the rest of the network, we can put these this traffic into there. And then it essentially can maintain network health while also helping out that customer a little bit with the DDoS traffic. We're obviously still going to deliver as much of that DDoS traffic to them as we can, but the goal here is to maintain network health. And the secondary would be to help out that customer, depending on the level of service they have with us, obviously.
Okay, so essentially, obviously, addressing the overall network design and then prioritizing how we address the traffic.
Exactly. Yep.
The two sort of takeaways that I've got from that. Okay, cool. Tom, how has Cloudflare addressed these issues over the last 12, 14 months in particular?
Sure. On a similar note, it really comes down to network capacity. When we're seeing attacks sort of at the terabit scale, it's really, really difficult for any network out there to actually be able to absorb and handle the attack traffic. And this certainly hasn't slowed down. Like continuously, we've seen DDoS attacks over 500 gigabits as a regular occurrence. And for most networks out there, they just simply can't carry that much traffic. And if you're talking about a consumer where they may have most of a gigabit connection, it obviously doesn't work. So building out the network and being able to filter attack traffic at the edge as it's ingressed is part of what we've done, and that's what's made us able to be able to deal with these attacks and the volume of them.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that perspective. Emerson or Flavio, well, maybe we'll go to Emerson on this question as a follow-up. Have you noticed anything or any perspective you have on what's happening, particularly in Brazil or the region in general, versus what's happening globally? Is there a nuance about Brazil or LATAM that is different or unique, you think, compared to the global impact of DDoS attacks?
Emerson, ele pergunta, da sua perspectiva, a diferença, a comparação entre os ataques de DDoS que ocorreram no Brasil, aqui na nossa região, comparada com os ataques que ocorreram no mundo. Se você tem alguma ponto de vista em relação a isso.
Legal, Lígio. Olha, Lígio, o Brasil é um dos centros aí de ataque no mundo inteiro. A gente sabe que aqui, né, tem muito esse tipo de coisa. mas a gente percebeu que os grandes ataques, principalmente os que atacaram os meus clientes aqui, vieram de fora, na grande maioria, China, Rússia, são os países aí preferidos que vêm esses ataques. Então, esses atacantes contratam esse serviço, e eu não sei como que é contratado isso, mas eles injetam lá uma carga de 100 GB, 200 GB de tráfego de ataque, que o ISP, na maioria das vezes, tem 10 GB de banda, ou 30 GB de banda, então, obviamente que vai saturar e ele, né, a gente não consegue entender com qual facilidade ele consegue contratar isso, né? Então, com relação ao mundo, o Brasil é um celeiro de ataques, né, seja recebendo ou produzindo ataques de DDoS, e a gente tem sofrido muito com isso. Os ISPs esse ano aqui de 2020, não 2021, né, 2020, sofreram muitos ataques, mas muito mesmo. Eu estou falando de 3 ou 4 que eu sofri como novel, não propriamente dito a novel, mas os meus clientes, que são outros provedores, que são outros ISPs, mas assim, a gente tem grupos ali no Telegram dos provedores, a gente se conversa, se fala muito, e assim, olha, de cada 10 provedores, pelo menos eu poderia citar 3 ou 4 sofreram ataque aí em 2020.
Okay. He said that Brazil is not very aware of the behavior of the attacks of the world, in the world, but he said that Brazil is one of the center, one of the big source of attacks, the big destiny of attacks in the world. He realized that most of attacks came from China and Russia. He supposed that this kind of attack are contracted, are hidden. He does not know how to do that, but he suspects that, and he make part of a Telegram group in the internet, and he said that 1 out of 10 providers had faced an attack in the last year.
Okay, interesting. I think there probably is some decent amount of commonality between what Emerson expressed in terms of where the attacks are coming from for what the rest of the world has experienced as well. I would suspect there's a lot of commonality there across the team. Okay, moving on to the next question. Thank you, Emerson. Moving on to the next question, Darren, I'm going to pose this to you first. What new trends are you seeing that are different? We've talked about some of this, but is there anything else that you would highlight in terms of trends that you're seeing either as a network provider or the broader ecosystem from a consumption perspective or from a network provider perspective that is different from a network security standpoint over the last 12, 14 months in particular?
I would say the biggest thing that we've seen is the attack sizes actually for us have not been as large as we've seen in the past. Now they have started to increase in size over the past 3 to 4 months for what we were seeing before. So that they're starting to trend up. And I touch on the duration aspect of that. But what's really interesting for me is the sophistication of the attacks that we've seen kind of really over the past year has been not very high. It's been a lot of DNS, NTP, CLDAP reflection attacks. And so those kinds of attacks are generally pretty easy to mitigate even without like a scrubbing service for the most part. But we're starting to see a rise of TCP SYN attacks. So those are a little more concerning because the packets, they're packet-based versus bit-based. And so those are handled a little bit differently from the router's perspective. And so while it may not be a very large attack from, a gigabit perspective, it's very large from the packet perspective, and it does cause congestion. So that can, some customers don't, they'll see that they're getting attacked, but the bit rate's not very high. And so they question if we're providing the service. So it becomes into a twofold situation where you're mitigating an attack, but you're also having to educate them on, the packets versus bits and things like that, which you can put down a connection. So yeah, but from any other perspective, no, not really, not on our side. Just those types of attacks changing. But I think a lot of it does have to do with the fact that more of these attacks are being launched by, teenagers at home that are either trying to get out of a test or trying to attack their friend playing a game. And it's easy for them to go on to these boot or stressor services websites and hire an attack for 5 minutes for a few bucks. So, and those types of, services typically don't have very advanced DDoS capabilities. They rely on these reflection attacks because they're cheap and easy to launch.
And more of a nuisance than anything else, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, appreciate that. Tom, what is your perspective on that particular question in terms of any different trends that you're seeing, either in terms of size of attacks or sophistication of attacks?
Yeah, in terms of just volumetric attacks, large-scale DDoSes, the numbers we've been seeing are not as large as we have in the past. So the largest DDoS attack we've seen was just around 1 terabit, but the largest one recently we saw in 2020 was about 650 gigabits. So in terms of the raw volume, they're not as large, but certainly the sophistication is growing. One of the big things we're seeing change is more and more IoT devices are participating in DDoS attacks. So a very poor security on those devices, default passwords, insecure operating systems, is allowing those devices to participate in DDoS attacks. And some of those attacks are quite sophisticated. So it's not just that they're being used to generate large volumes of traffic. We're actually seeing those try and attack application levels. So we're seeing things like a slowrus attack, where it's using very slow TLS keys to be able to drain resources. And so we're certainly seeing a lot more sophisticated attacks like that, and just the breadth of the devices participating in them growing through those insecure devices.
So you would concur with Darren then that the sophistication is starting to trend more towards being sophisticated in recent months than it has in the past?
I think it's growing. The sophistication is continuing to grow probably fairly linearly. So since probably 2018, we've been seeing these attacks really grow and grow to that same sort of sophistication, and that's continuing to grow fairly linearly. But in terms of the large scale attacks, those have definitely slowed down a bit. But the sophisticated attacks are continuing to grow.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, good perspective, thank you. Emerson, what is your perspective on that particular question of trends recently in terms of either sophistication or the size of attack, so to speak?
Emerson, ele pergunta a sua impressão em relação aos ataques, se você sofreu ataques mais sofisticados ou se foram ataques de maior intensidade, de maior tamanho.
Sim, diretamente eu não sofri, mas os meus clientes sofreram ataques mais sofisticados, obviamente. Ataques de diversas maneiras, ataques vindo de fora da rede para dentro da rede do ISP, e ataques principalmente saindo da rede do ISP para atacar outros ISPs ou outras pessoas ou outras organizações, enfim. E uma coisa que a gente tem percebido nas ferramentas que a gente tem, que não são muitas, mas a gente faz aquilo que a gente consegue, né? Que um dos grandes alvos são sistemas VoIP, que a gente tem recebido muitos ataques por sistemas VoIP, e muito frequentemente aqueles aparelhinhos de IPTV, que entra, não sei se entra no IoT aí, mas aqueles aparelhinhos de IPTV normalmente vêm com algum backdoor, com algum cavalo de Troia, ou com algum spoofing, enfim, a gente tem percebido muito isso, sim.
Okay, he said that he didn't suffer a direct attack, but their customers, yes, they received the attacks. And also, he agrees that the sophistication of attack has increased. The most of the attacks, in his perspective, is about directed to the VoIP and IPTV device. That is a very used, very adopted here in Brazil.
Sorry, say that last part again, Ligio.
The VoIP devices.
Oh, VoIP devices. Okay.
And IPTV devices.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, Emerson. And then going to Flavio with the same question. How has, in your opinion, over these last several months, the sophistication or the size of attacks differed for your network or your customers?
Flávio, a mesma pergunta para você. Nos últimos meses aí, nos últimos 7 meses, o que você percebeu? Né, se os ataques foram mais sofisticados ou se os ataques cresceram em tamanho, em size, né, em intensidade?
Assim como o Emerson, né, uma diferença do Emerson é que na nossa região, e que a gente percebe, é que os ataques variam de regiões para regiões. Parece que a galera tem até um estudo com relação a isso. Na nossa região, como colocado pelo Emerson, a gente tem bastante equipamento de IPTV. E geralmente ali a gente tem um backdoor, um cavalo de Troia, enfim, algo que nasce ali, né? E também muitas ONTs de tecnologia GPON, onde a gente tem bastante vulnerabilidade. Roteadores de algumas fabricantes que vêm com alguma vulnerabilidade de segurança. Então, a nossa rede, assim como o Emerson, nós em si, o nosso AS não sofreu ataque, mas clientes menores até, na volumetria, que estão atrás do nosso AS, sofreram bastante. E o canal de entrada para nós aqui, para nossa região, foi esse também.
Okay. Flavio said that different from Emerson, he believed that the attacks, the nature of attacks is different from the region to region. Despite in the south, they faced, or they also faced the attacks, they believe, which source is the IPTV device. They also believe that ONT, optical network terminal, has vulnerabilities from the vendors that has to fix it, and basically they didn't suffer the direct attack, but the small customers behind them suffer those attacks. So the response is the sophistication of the attack has increased in the last months.
Has increased, yeah?
Has increased, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that's very much in line with everybody else's comment as well, correct?
Correct.
So that's an interesting commonality to see as well. Thank you, Flavio. So going on to the next question, given what we're seeing now and what we've experienced over the last several months, and obviously the sophistication is increasing, the durations are increasing, there's some commonality around all of that geographically and globally, right? What do we need to be thinking differently, Tom, in your opinion? None of us, again, had foreseen what was coming about a year and a half ago. But what do you think as either network operators or part of the ecosystem, what do we need to be thinking about differently in terms of network protection and protection for our customers in the months and years ahead?
Sure. Going back to the other panelists said as well, is the best practices is something that we need to really do. These DDoS attacks are going to lead to a centralization of the internet, or they're continuing to do that already, whereby smaller players just simply cannot exist on the internet without relying on services from a handful of providers who are large enough to deal with DDoS attacks. And the only way to fix this is really at the source and adopting the best common practices. Things like BCP38, which allow for the spoofing attacks to operate, unfortunately still haven't been rolled out across a majority of networks. And that really is a big problem for the whole internet. So that really needs to change to be able to be able to stay on the internet and continue to survive. So that's one really big thing that needs to change, I think.
Okay, and I want to touch on BCP38 and get Darren's perspective as well on it. In your opinion, what do you think are the challenges to sort of getting that propagated across the networks in the way that you envision seeing it? Sorry, Tom, that was a follow-up to you, and I want to ask Darren the same question. Apologies.
Sure. Sorry, can you say that again? Sorry, I'm just getting my own details.
You mentioned BCP38 and the challenges around it. What specifically do you think are the main challenges around getting that rolled out and propagated across the networks like we should, in your opinion?
Sure. I think knowledge is one of the big problems in a lot of providers, is that although this is a best common practice and we talk about it at all the industry events, it still isn't really rolled out to everywhere, and not everyone is knowledgeable about it. There could be things from vendors like safe defaults. So that's something that we should definitely push for, is that a Cisco or a Juniper of the world actually pushes in where they can this to be a safe default inside their networks or inside their devices, so that people don't need to worry about it, is that there is some security already turned on from day zero. But I think there's also the worry of costs, like implementing BCP38 is not free to network hardware. This is going back quite some time in the experience, but older generation devices may lose a sort of a third to half of their forwarding capability by turning on BCP38. That I think is lesser in some devices, but it also really depends on how it's running. Especially in Brazil, we see that there are hundreds or thousands of small ISPs which are running on say MikroTik hardware or very, very cheap hardware, which may not have the same forwarding capabilities of a Juniper or Cisco, and those could be hugely impacted. Like if you're a small ISP and you lost your ability to send half of your traffic, you probably wouldn't want to turn that on, because that would be a big issue for you. So these are challenges I think we need to overcome as an industry.
Yeah, absolutely, and appreciate that. I think that highlighting that challenge in markets like Brazil is important, because that's sort of core to the issue as well. Switched around a little bit, going to Darren next. Darren, what is your perspective on what we need to be doing as a network operator, perhaps an NTT perspective, on future-proofing the concerns that we've experienced over the last 14 months? And then if you've got any comments or views on BCP38, that'd be great as well.
Yeah, I definitely think, moving forward as network operators, it's going to come down to making smart decisions on, the types of hardware that we roll out and the types of security policies that we do put in. BCP38 is difficult from our perspective because we have customers that are multi-homed. And so trying to apply that on, in our environment, we've tried it in the past. Network issues, the issues that the routers had with it is obviously a concern, but it's also just being able to do it properly is difficult, because you're essentially going to block traffic for customers. And so the biggest thing I think is going to be education on that, like Tom said, and reminding our customers to do these things. And as somebody who has to enforce an AUP as part of my role, going to customers that are causing these attacks and asking them to do something about it, and then educating them on BCP38. But it also comes down to how cheap it is to essentially turn up, a an internet provider from the perspective of buying hardware. You can build a router out of a PC. And, when you do those things, you're going to lack a lot of the inherent security that would come with, let's say Juniper or Cisco turning these things on by default. And so I think just as we grow as a network and we grow as, the internet, become more and more reliant on it, more so than we have in the past. This past year has really shown how important the internet is. We're going to have to take these steps to, quite honestly, in some cases, from a network perspective, force upon security on our customers in order to maintain the network health. And while we don't want to do that, we like, a free and open internet. Things like our low effort queue are going to have to be used in order to maintain network health. And I think that, for the good of the internet, that's just something that's going to have to be done. And obviously also stronger enforcement of policies as well.
And would you say NTT is taking some of these steps as we speak? Is that something you're actively involved in terms of sort of looking forward in time and ensuring that we're operating a safer environment, more protected environment?
Oh, absolutely. We, BCP 38 aside, because the cost involved in that is just too high from our perspective. But enforcing, AUP, getting customers to, stop these things. If we have customers that come under attack, we often look at the sources where the traffic's coming from. And then if they're our own customers attacking other customers, which obviously is going to happen in a network our size, we do reach out to them and we, educate them. And we've been successful in them shutting down servers that have been compromised and things like that. So we're definitely, pushing forward with that and continuing to operate in that manner.
Okay, thank you, Darren. So I've got two more questions I want to go around. So I'm going to switch the questions up a little bit for Emerson and Flavio and go to the next question. Because sensitive of time is here as well. So do either of you or both of you see Emerson and Flavio collaboration amongst network providers and or even competitors for that matter as we go forward? We've talked about best practices and I'm going to touch on that. It's my last question. But do you see an opportunity for us within the ecosystem to collaborate more as we look forward in time to be able to better protect and secure the networks?
Essa pergunta para o Emerson e para o Flávio, ele fala sobre a colaboração entre os provedores de internet. Se vocês veem uma oportunidade de colaboração nessa área de segurança, como que pode ajudar melhorando a segurança com a colaboração entre os provedores. Pode começar com o Flávio, isso. Ok.
Pode ser? Bom, eu acho que vejo que a colaboração entre os pequenos provedores é, de certa forma, muito válida e muito efetiva, né? Como já colocado pelo Emerson, muitas das vezes, o pequeno, como ele não tem condições de arcar com um serviço de DDoS, e em certos casos, geralmente, triplica o valor da banda, se caso for contratado direto com a operadora, nós, gestores desses backbones, acabamos sempre nos unindo, trocando informação, trocando metodologias de trabalho, via grupos de Telegram, WhatsApp. Então, eu, enquanto regional aqui, não posso falar do país todo, né? Porque cada região é uma região. Mas a gente tem bastante desse espírito colaborativo aí. A Emerson acho que pode complementar.
He said about the small and medium providers, the collaboration between them is very valid and straight to the point, ahead to the point. That due to the high cost of the DDoS defense, they have to work together in order to spread the information regarding the attacks, and they used to do that through the Telegram and I forgot the name. the apps of the messages, right? They used to do the change or the exchange of information through these kind of groups.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. And if you can pose the same question to Emerson and get his perspective as well, that'd be great.
Emerson, a mesma pergunta para você, né? Como que você vê em relação à colaboração entre os provedores, como que pode ser melhorado e como que a gente pode se ajudar trocando informações de forma a minimizar esses ataques?
Olha, exemplo do que o Flávio comentou, aqui também em São Paulo não é diferente, mas a gente tem um apoio aqui, principalmente de um grande órgão governamental da sociedade civil, que são o Registro BR, o X.br, tem ali o PTT.br, enfim, são as redes do PTT que acabam interconectando ali vários provedores. Eles promovem muito evento, então eles têm muitos eventos ao longo dos anos de melhores práticas com outras empresas, então empresas de grande porte, de médio, pequeno porte, então a gente acaba trocando muitas experiências nesses treinamentos, eventos que o XBR acaba promovendo para toda a comunidade de SP no Brasil. E não só também ali, a gente tem os grupos do Telegram, os grupos do WhatsApp, que a gente acabou citando um pouco mais os grupos do Telegram pela limitação de tanto provedor que tem, acaba que o WhatsApp não comporta um número grande de ISPs ou de parceiros que trabalham diretamente na área, mas a comunidade se ajuda com políticas de roteamento compartilhada, né, como IRR, como RPKI, mas o que eu vejo, assim, até o Flávio depois pode comentar, o que eu vejo muito que ainda é um ponto muito crucial para todos os ISPs pequenos do Brasil. Tirando aí os grandes, maiores players, são os 4 maiores aí, talvez, todos os ISPs carecem de uma tecnologia de anti-DDoS, de uma proteção. E aí, seja ele um firewall conectado aqui diretamente instalado na infraestrutura do provedor, e a opção mais prática para nós seria ali ter a solução de anti-DDoS, essas ferramentas vindo da operadora, mitigando esses riscos, que é uma solução que é um ativo a menos que a gente tem que gerenciar dentro da nossa infraestrutura.
Okay, Emerson. He said that the collaboration, the support of the internet providers communities is very valid, and he mentioned about the IXBR and Registro BR organisms here in Brazil, that they collaborate a lot with the events, with the webinars and training to the internet community here in Brazil. They also exchange information through the groups, as Flavio mentioned it, and they use the Telegram and WhatsApp for that. But the main point that Emerson pointed was that the main providers in the region, they don't have a DDoS solution to implemented in their backbone. So as the result of that, they have to contract this in. This is a high cost for the small and medium providers here in the region.
That is a big problem. That is an unfortunate problem if that is indeed the case. And I certainly can appreciate the challenges that come out of that, both from a cost perspective and implementation standpoint. So that's a very relevant point. So that's good. The theme that came out of those answers, in my opinion, is sort of the education around security and DDoS and so on and so forth. And that's where collaboration is going to have a vast impact. And it's good to hear that providers like IX Brazil and Equinix are taking that seriously as well. We've got about 5 minutes left, and so I'm conscious about time. I want to get a quick soundbite from each of you on best practices, because that's a theme that came out right from the outset of this conversation. So Tom, if we can start with you and just go around, what is the one thing you would say about best practices and where we need to focus on as a community?
Sure. I mean, they're called best practices because they are the best practice, and so they really need to be followed to enable security. BCP 38 as a network operator is hugely important, but so is other best practices like securing your devices, routing security, RPKI. These are all really important and should be followed to make sure the internet's safe, not just for the operator, but for everyone involved.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Emerson, what is your opinion on best practices?
Emerson, ele pergunta para você e depois para o Flávio uma coisa, né, para ser mencionada, já que a gente tem só mais 5 minutos aqui, sobre as melhores práticas de segurança, para você apontar.
Olha, do ponto de vista do ISP, eu apontaria essas políticas de roteamento, que são a adoção do RPKI, a adoção de IRR no backbone de todos os ISPs, né, principalmente partindo da gente. Mas o ponto crucial que eu destacaria é a solução de anti-DDoS, uma solução, isso vindo das operadoras para atender. Eu sei que a NTT tem essa solução, como outros players também têm, e o pós essa solução seria uma solução de firewall interno na rede do ISP, que é o que falta para a maioria dos ISPs melhores.
Okay. He said about the main things regarding best practices to implement best routing policies in their backbone. The use of RPKI and IRR, but the crucial point of that is to implement, to make available the anti-DDoS services coming from the upstream providers. And in the last point is to implement security in the end user, like firewall, like IDS, and so on.
Extremely relevant points. Thank you, Emerson. Darren, going over to you, what is your perspective? I've heard RPKI and IRR a couple of times. What is your viewpoint on best practices?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to echo what Tom said, they are best practices, and we call them best practices for a reason. So RPKI, very important for routing security, securing your devices, taking advantage of services offered by your providers as well. I think it's very important to know who your providers are and what they offer. If your house is on fire, you don't call the dog catcher. So you need to have a relationship with your providers in that aspect, as well as training. All these things mean nothing if your NOC guys don't know what to do in an event of emergency. And so to train them well, and to also what I would call as war games with your providers. We do that with our customers. We're happy to do that with our customers, just as an ongoing training for them. We see DDoS every day, but a NOC guy may not.
Sounds good. Thank you, Darren. Good perspectives. And Flavio, going to you. Last but not least, what is your viewpoint on best practices, please?
Flávio, ele fala, você que, por último, mas não menos importante, sobre a sua opinião, uma coisa que você apontaria sobre melhores práticas aí para anti-DDoS.
Bom, o Emerson já resumiu bem com relação às melhores práticas RPKI e mitigação de DDoS na borda aí. Sabemos que isso é primordial, é importante, o pequeno busca isso o tempo todo, mas a gente acaba esbarrando, como sempre, em valores. E a gente busca porque a gente sabe o quão desesperador quando temos um ataque volumétrico ou contra nosso AS ou contra o AS que está atrás do nosso, por conta que acaba afetando todo mundo. Então, além das colocações do Emerson, muito bem colocadas, eu creio e acredito também que o endpoint final pode colaborar de bastante forma. Às vezes a conscientização por parte do usuário em determinados acessos, o endpoint que o provedor fornece para o usuário, para a gente acabar não vendo só o preço, só o valor, optando sempre pelo mais barato. Isso pode ajudar bastante a não alimentar esse mundo de phishing, esse mundo de DDoS que a gente tem hoje.
Okay. He said about he agrees with what Emerson has mentioned, that the solutions like RPKI and mitigation in the edge, it's very important. But also, in addition, he mentioned about to implement security in the endpoints. In the endpoints, they mean the devices that the access providers they use to install in the final user end site.
Okay, interesting perspective as well. I think again some common thread in Flavio's answer as well, and going beyond to the end user to provide maximum amount of protection. So, thank you, Flavio. Darren, I want to kind of give you the last word here, if you wouldn't mind, and then I want to wrap up real quick. As NTT being a network provider as well as a DDoS service provider, what are some of the things you'd highlight in terms of, from a customer perspective, they need to look at, standpoint of the services we offer and others like us offer, perhaps?
Yeah, I think, from for our customers, definitely looking at our DDoS protection service to help, deal with these attacks is going to be very key. We offer different levels of service depending on the customer's need, but I think most importantly is automation. And the automation piece comes with our DPS Max service, where we can respond to attacks in about 30 seconds. And when you're looking at an attack that's going to be 5 minutes in duration, it might take your NOT guys at least 10 minutes to see what's going on and figure out what's going on, and maybe even longer. And then for them to get to, to call, it could be even longer than that. And so we've had customers that have told us, it's between 15 to 30 minutes for them to react, but it was, just a couple minutes for us to react. And so we can make that even faster by letting the computers do their jobs, automate that stuff. And it's going to be, successful for everybody.
Thank you, Darren. Let's park it there. Goes back to that point about upstream providers providing the protection to the various consumers of services from our standpoint. So that speaks right directly to it, and appreciate that. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Tom for taking time to spend this last hour with us. Emerson, thank you as well for taking time to be with us here today. Flavio, thank you also for taking some valuable time out of your day to be with us. I think all of you shared some really good insights. There were a lot of common threads. Towards the end, we heard a lot about RPKI and IRR. So it's certainly core to everything we do as an industry. And Darren and Ligio, thank you both as well for sharing your insights. And Ligio, particularly, thank you for helping translate and keeping us engaged with both Emerson and Flavio. I think that was a good session, and hope you all got out of it as much as I did and the rest of the crowd did. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Vish, for this excellent moderation of this session, and NTT for making this all possible. I would once again just like to remind everyone that this session will be available on the platform for the next 30 days. So if you would like to rewatch or share with one of your colleagues, please feel free to do so. Thank you, everyone, again, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you and goodbye.